Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. What we're talking about today is a sort of dynamic um, data source creation. This is what allows us to be able to present information to the users in a related way. We refer to this really just as relationships. Previously, for those of you who had used Snappy, if you, excuse me, had information that you wanted to convey. For example, you had information. In this case, we're using the a property app that we've created, and I've got information on districts, and I've got information on the types of apartment within those districts, and then the descriptions of all of those different properties. You had to do them in a list format, bind categories to them, but you really were limited in how you could present the information and how much information you could marry together. With the latest release of the product, we now have the ability to really almost endlessly relate the information together by creating relationships and by being able to take advanced list information, drop that inside an advanced list. Inside that second list, we could drop another list, and so on, almost again to an endless degree. So the levels of information that you're able to provide and the amount of information is greatly increased. What I'm going to do is take you to the back end of the Snappii platform. I imagine that several of you have gotten a chance to use it, but for any of those of you who have not yet, this is what the Snappii WYSIWYG editor looks like on the back end, and this is how you will build your mobile app. And the first thing that you need to do when creating relationships or sort of dynamic advanced lists is go to your data sources section right here. This is really the heart of your app for anyone who's using data rich information. The information that I'm going to take you through, sort of the process, is based on uploading your information by way of spreadsheets. So the information that I have here, and I'll show you how we've detailed it out, are all spreadsheets that we have uploaded. However, this same process does work when your data source is actually a data connector. And by data connector, what I mean is the ability to connect to any web service by way of RESTful API. So, for example, Salesforce. Down here under Data Source Templates, we have something for Salesforce leads. This is a pre-built connector, one that we have already built for you. So if you are building an app and you wanted to bring Salesforce lead information into that app, we've already created all of that for you, and you are just going to put the information into the data source with excuse me, your own specific details. I'm not going to walk through that detailed process today, only because there is quite a lot of information just specifically on how to set up that data connector. And we do have both a webinar and a instructional video on our Snappii YouTube channel, and you could access that just by going to the snappii.com website and clicking on the webinar page. Down at the bottom you'll see some buttons. It'll take you right out to the associated webinars and walkthrough tutorial. But I did want you to know that this process I'm going through today by way of these spreadsheets and creating relationships, were you to have a data connector, for example, Salesforce leads, or one that you're actually building yourself, if you have a proprietary database on your back end, or MySQL or something to that effect, as long as it works with a web service and there's a REST API that can connect, you will be able to have that information pulled in your app. Your data connector would show up here, just like these other data sources, as another line item, and you could build associated relationships between various spreadsheets and your data connector, or even potentially various data connectors. So in the case of this app, we basically have sort of three layers of information. We have the district info, where we've broken it out by, the Bronx, Manhattan. We have the types of apartments, so lofts, studio apartments, 4-bedroom. And then we have the property details, which goes into what does the apartment look like, all of the things it contains, and contact capabilities as well. I'm going to click on the district info here. For those of you, again, who may not be familiar with Snappii, and for those of you who are, hopefully this is just a bit of a refresher for you. This is a spreadsheet that we uploaded with these various fields within the spreadsheet. This is sort of the highest level of list information that I have in this particular app. This is that first level that users are then going to drill down from there. And Snappii does try to automatically populate the type of field here based on what the name of the field is. Sometimes there's a default that fills in, for example, ID. ID is a unique number that you assign to each line item in your spreadsheet, and that tells the spreadsheets how to talk to each other. And I'm going to show you that in a moment as well. Typically, this is a number, and because it's a number, Snappii will automatically label it as numeric. In this instance, when building relationships, that ID numeric field needs to be labeled as text. So you'll need to change that. It's just the way that the relationships work and identify with each other. In other cases, outside of relationships, that field may be numeric. And just so you know, this is a lot of information we're going through today, and I'm going to be going through it relatively quickly, only so that I can show you all of the steps to building this type of relationship dynamic data source information. But there is detailed information on how to build these relationships in the user manual. If you go to the snappii.com website under the Resources tab and click User Manual, there are several pages of information that walk you through the different types of relationship that you can set up with step-by-step instructions. And as well, as I said, I am recording this webinar, so I am going to be going through it somewhat quickly, but I did want you to know that those resources will be available to you. As well, we will be recording a series of these instructional videos for each type of relationship that is available. And actually, while I'm mentioning that, I will tell you there are sort of 3 relationships that are available to be created in the database today. You have a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship, and a many-to-many relationship. And so a one-to-one relationship, for example, might be, I'm talking to you right now about the districts that I have, so Bronx, Manhattan, and so forth. And that's one spreadsheet. My second spreadsheet is the different types of apartments or properties, so lofts, studios, and so forth. In a one-to-one relationship, I would have maybe 10 line items on one spreadsheet and 10 line items on the other spreadsheet. But each one of those line items on the first spreadsheet relates to only one line item on the second spreadsheet. So if I have 10 districts in my first spreadsheet and 10 properties in my second spreadsheet, each district is going to relate to only one property. That's the simplest level of relationship, and that's one-to-one. A one-to-many relationship is when I have a spreadsheet, again, maybe it's got 10 districts on it, and the other spreadsheet has 10 properties on it. But some of my districts might relate to more than one property. So in the Bronx, I might have one property related to one property, but in Brooklyn, I might have one district related to 5 properties. So if one line item on one spreadsheet relates to many line items on another spreadsheet, that is a one-to-many relationship. And then the third is a many-to-many relationship. And again, it sort of goes from the simplest form to the most complex form. And for a many-to-many relationship, it is many line items on one spreadsheet relate to many line items on the second spreadsheet. So getting back to this data source here, so this is my highest level of relationship that I'm creating. This is my district. It's very simple. I've got a picture that I've associated in my spreadsheet, and district is going to be my sort of binding information for my other spreadsheets. Once you have your spreadsheet uploaded and you've identified the types of fields, save your data source. Before you do anything else, save it. Oftentimes what people will do is upload all of their spreadsheets. You make the changes here, then you go over here and you upload another spreadsheet. If you don't save the changes in each individual spreadsheet, just hitting save is only going to save the information in the most current spreadsheet you are in. So in order to build relationships, you need to have all of your spreadsheets uploaded that you're going to use. But as you upload each spreadsheet, change your column types, determine if you have any of those fields that you want to be either sortable or searchable for the end user, and then save. Click Add, drop in your next spreadsheet, and follow that same process. Once you've done that, then you can start building your relationships. So, making the assumption that we have in fact uploaded all of our spreadsheets, each one of them has been detailed with the proper field types, and I've saved them. Because district is going to be my parent data source for the particular relationship I'm creating, I'm in that spreadsheet, and I'm going to go to Manage Relationships. This is really the heart of where you build the understanding of the relationship between various spreadsheets. So you can see here, I've got one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. And these are all going to be blank when you're first building these relationships. And by default, Snappii starts at the most basic level of relationship, which is one-to-one. And you can see here, based on the information you're uploading, you're going to determine what kind of relationship you're building. We're going to go to one-to-many here because what I have is my district info, in fact, relates to many line items of information. So right here, you can see this is the information. I've already created this relationship and saved it, and that's why you see this information here. But I am just going to walk you through how that happened. We selected one-to-many, and then the information here, you've got related, data source and ID field and label, and then you have current ID field and label. The way that this works is related means what spreadsheet are you going to relate this to? And then current fields are the spreadsheet that you're relating from. So in this case, I am relating my district data source to my apartment type data source. I had two options. These are the two other data sources that I have, apartment type and property details. And I related it to apartment type. The related ID field, that is that unique number that exists throughout any of the spreadsheets that you are relating to each other. You can call it pretty much anything you want, however it's going to help you associate the spreadsheets together. I utilize ID by default because I know without a doubt I'm not going to forget 3 months down the road when I go back in to make a new relationship that I called my ID field something else. If it's ID, I know that means it's my unique number. And then the related label field, I wanted it to tell me what type of property it was. And then over here in the current ID field, remember this is the spreadsheet I am relating from. So this relates to the spreadsheet I'm actually in right now, my district spreadsheet. Your ID field, again, in my case, is ID, that unique numeric detail. And then the label in this case is district. The only information that's going to show up in any of these fields is the information that is inside the associated spreadsheets. If you have 30 lines of information in one spreadsheet and you click on it here, you click on it here, 30 lines of information are going to show up. Again, that's one of the reasons that I use ID. No matter how many lines of information, or how many columns, I should say, of information I have in my spreadsheet, I'm always going to know that ID is that number field that I'm going to marry together with my other spreadsheets. So once I've created this relationship, again, this is a one-to-many relationship, I just click Add. And that's what I did here. When you see that relationship show up here, you know that it's worked correctly for this spreadsheet. The next thing you want to do is look at the spreadsheet you married this to be sure that it also shows up there. And so I'm going to do that by clicking on my apartment type. So in this spreadsheet, you can see this is a really simple spreadsheet. It just has the types of apartments. So again, studios, lofts, and so forth. It has the ID field, which we used as the unique identifier to tie to my district info. Also in this spreadsheet is ID1. This is because I'm relating this apartment spreadsheet to my property spreadsheet as well. And so I created a unique identifier to go between my apartment type and my property detail spreadsheets. And I'll show you that in a moment. So if we click on Manage Relationships here, and we go to one-to-many because that's the relationship we created. First, you'll see parent data source. This is the relationship that we just walked through. The district spreadsheet is the parent data source, and you can see that that information is tied right here. So we know, in fact, the relationship we just created does exist in the second in the second spreadsheet here, the apartment types. Also, what you see here is another relationship. This is the relationship that was created to marry the apartment type spreadsheet to the property details. And this really is what's going to allow us to drop lists inside of lists. And we're going to walk through that in a few minutes. Because I've related these various spreadsheets to each other, as I start to build my lists, the platform is going to recognize that I have these existing data sources, and I'm going to be able to pick between them and select the fields that I want to show my user in various different ways. So again, for the property details spreadsheet, just sort of a reminder of how we created a relationship here. For this second relationship, my apartment type spreadsheet is now a parent data source. And so I went down and I clicked my property details spreadsheet. Now again, I'm clicking ID number 1 because that's the unique identifier that's tying my apartment type to my property details. And I clicked property name because that's what specifically I want to show to the user. I want them to be able to see the property name when they're looking at the list. And then this information is related to the spreadsheet I am marrying from here, the apartment type. Again, the unique identifier, which was ID1, and the label field. In this case, I have a very small spreadsheet, so my type label field is by default the one I'm going to select. And again, to save that relationship, you would hit add. So I'm going to close out of here, and I'm going to make sure that this relationship here between the apartment type and the property details shows up in the property details. So I'm going to click here. And this spreadsheet is much more involved because it has all the information about my property, number of bedrooms and how much it costs, the photo, and so forth. You will see here ID field number 1. That's that unique identifier that's tying the property details to the apartment type. And if I click on my relationships, and again one-to-many because that's the type of relationship we created, I do see that the relationship was created and that the parent data source is the apartment type. So I know so far that all the relationships I've created do show up in each of the various spreadsheets that are tied to each other. And always, as I mentioned, as you're creating these relationships, just like when you initially upload your spreadsheets, after you've finished creating a relationship in one spreadsheet, hit the save button before moving to your next one. Otherwise, the information is not going to save. When you go to your second spreadsheet, you're not going to see it there, and you'll have to build the relationship again. So what we're going to do now is we've created our relationships. We've put the information into the data sources. We've told each data source how it's going to relate to each other data source. And now we're going to do the second piece of the process, which is pull all that information into the app so that the user can see it. And we're going to do that by way of an advanced list. Now, I did, again, already create this information so that you could see it. In the interest of time, I wanted to be sure that I could show you everything, but I am going to show you how it was created. And so what we did was took an advanced list right here in our tabs section, and we dropped it down into the app. And I called it apartments, but I'm going to open it up for you so you can see. This is just what you're going to title it and name it for your users. So we named it apartments, and that's what the user sees. And for my own purposes, I labeled it apartments as well. I do definitely recommend that you use your titles when you're using advanced lists, especially if you're doing lists inside of lists, because when you open this up, you can see it's titled apartments here. I understand that that's the second level of information that I have on my list. And as we start to drill down here and you see that I've got a list inside a list, I'm going to get to a third level of information, and I've titled that something else. It really helps you as the app creator to remember which list you're working on. It can get super confusing when you've got many lists and you're dropping lists inside of lists, and each one of those lists is configured differently. If you title them up here, it's just kind of that little mental note that, oh, right, I'm in my apartment list right now. So again, we're going to go back into the advanced list that we dropped down. List view. This really is the key to how you're going to display your information to your users. Again, for those of you who are familiar with the platform, you've probably had an opportunity to see this type of information before, but I'm just going to walk through it quickly for those of you who perhaps haven't seen it. You're going to select your data source. So in this instance, I'm at the very top level of information that I want to show my users. The very first thing I want them to be able to search by is the district in New York City. So I clicked district info because that's the data source that's going to be my number one top level of information. And then here, the list view, which is also called the cell view. When you look at it in your app, it's going to say cell view, and it's called list view here. You can either use one of our templates by default. So for example, if all you wanted to show was for your top level of list view is the names of the districts, that's it, you could just pick header 1. And your options for what is in your spreadsheet will show up here. You, in this case, would pick district, and it will show you all of the districts on a list, and your users can click on it and go from there. In this case, I decided that I want it to be a custom view, and I did that because I want to be able to add different information than just one of the templates that I could pick from. I want to lay things out in a different way. I'm going to hit cancel here only because I've already set up how I want this to happen in the app. And again, detail view, same type of thing. You can pick any one of the templated options that we have here. So just, makes it a little bit easier for you. If any one of these fit, you don't have to do anything but tell it that you want it to pull the header, the image, and your levels of details and have them show exactly like this. Or if you want to have full control over how that information looks to the user, you'll pick custom view. And I'll walk you through what those different elements that we have for our custom view looks like. So once I have done that at this highest level of my advanced list, I now can see my different views here. Now both of these for me, I do have the availability to go in and do something with. If I had selected, for example, just that template view for the cell view here, it will not say edit cell view. It will just say cell view. It will be gray and you won't be able to do anything to it. Because I picked custom, I can now click in here. For me, I wanted to be able to show the name of the district and I wanted there to be a photo. Again, you could take any really of the elements here and pull them over. In my case, I did the photo element and I did the name of the district. So I took a text button right here. I dragged it over and I dropped it here. I'm going to open it up so you can see what it looks like. By default, this has some text in it. We've put it in there only to be used as a spacer, if you will. If the information that you're putting in here could potentially be a couple of sentences long, you want to continue to put information in here to account for the number of spaces you think you may need to use. I very often will label it the information that I'm putting in. So for example, the information that I put in here was my district. The name of my district. I do this again because when you get into more detailed levels of your spreadsheet, which you'll see as we drill down a little bit, we're getting into the detail view and there are a number of text fields in here. It's a lot easier for me to be able to just look and say, oh, right, okay, so this field is district details. And if I have a number of text fields here and I put if you want to or some other nonsensical information in here, I'm going to have to look at every single one of them to remember what information I actually tied it to. So again, for me, it's just a little tip for building the apps that if I name it what it actually is, I'm going to be able to more easily edit it. So I called it what I wanted. You can, of course, choose the font size, how you want it to align on the screen, the color of the font. You can choose the width, how much space you think you need it to go across the screen. Right here, this is going to be key. You have the option to choose between data source or constant. Data source simply means that the information that's, even though I've put district details in here, when you actually look at it on the app, the information that's going to show up is the actual names of the district that are in my spreadsheet because I told it to look at my data source for that information. If I select constant, what you would see in the app is a line item that says district detail. Really, the only time that you would use const is if you wanted to label the information that the user is going to see. So in this case, it's pretty clear on my list, the Bronx, Manhattan, Greenwich Village. It's clear that those are the districts, so I don't need to label them district. But when we get down to the details of the property itself, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, I am going to label those bathroom and bedroom. And so I'm going to do that by putting constant. And then I'm going to add a second text field and label it as data source. And it's going to pull in the actual number of bedrooms and the actual number of bathrooms associated with each property. So my detail view was my second level of information. So when you're looking at the app, when the user is looking at the app, they're going to see a list of districts. When they click on a district, this detail view is what they're going to see underneath. Now in this case, I decided that I wanted to show a picture of the district itself. So we have a picture of Brooklyn, a picture of the Bronx, and that's this first item right here. I just dragged over an image button, pulled it over here, and told it what I wanted it to show. I picked a height and width based on how much space I wanted it to take up on the screen. I tied it to my data source. Again, if you don't tie it to your data source, the only thing that's going to show here is whatever picture is sitting here right now. And then I told it that I wanted to click to select my picture. No matter how many fields of information you have in a spreadsheet, so if this data source had 30 lines of information in it, I'm only going to see any line item that says image as the field type. So Snappii by default isn't going to show you 30 fields in your spreadsheet. It's only going to show you the field that you could possibly pick for an image. So it's just a way to help you out not selecting the incorrect information to put in this field. By default, the Snappii logo shows up when you do this. So even though you have selected your data source and told it that you want to pull the images from your data source into the app, for the back end purposes of what you're looking at, you're always going to see this Snappii logo. Here, again, I pulled over a text field and dropped it in. And in the text field, this is where I have my description. Now, in this case, I had the availability to put any one of these line items into my text. So you do have to be careful to be sure you've selected the correct information. And it will be very easy for you to know if you haven't, because once you save your app and you look at it on your device and you don't see the information you thought you were going to, the very first thing to do is come back here and look, did I click data source or constant? And did I pick the right field? If what I wanted to show here was the description, I should have picked description, and by accident I picked district. So again, go right back to these elements and look at how you tied them together, how you selected the information. And very oftentimes that was the issue that you had. When you select the correct information, you'll see it show up properly. And then this third item right here, this is a list that I'm dropping inside the detail view of my district list. So again, to do that, I'm just going to take an advanced list button and I'm going to drag it onto the screen. Once I do that, I'm going to see this. Again, looks very familiar. This is exactly what we saw when we created that first level, our district list. Again, you can call it whatever you want. When you label it, this is actually the label that will show up on this big button here. I've called it available rentals. Of course, you can call it whatever you're associating your information with. And the view mode here, I have a couple of options. I'm going to just jump out for a second. Just so you know, what I've done here is a framed view, and I'll explain that to you. I also could do a button, and a button and a frame have the same functionality underneath them. If I pick button view or frame view, excuse me, I have the availability to then determine what my list is going to look like underneath. So whether my user gets to this, they click on my district, they select Brooklyn, they get to this view, they see a photo, they see some text about the district, and then they see, in my case, this big frame that says available rentals. They also could see a button that says available rentals. Either of those allows you to select not only how the information is going to look once the user clicks on that, but it's going to give you the availability to customize what else you might want to put on those screens. If you were to select the third option, which is full screen view, what would happen when the user clicked on available rentals is that they would get a full list of available rentals. What I can't do is in this particular advanced list, and we'll click on it and walk through it, I put information underneath this. Not only did I want people to be able to see the details in my advanced list, I wanted to put some other things on my screen that's below this level. The only way that I can do that is to either make this a button or a framed view. And I am just going to go in here again and show you this is the same thing you saw before. Now, my first data source I clicked on was district type because that was my top level of information. Now this second list that I'm dropping inside my first list is my apartment type. So studios, lofts, and so forth. And then again, I decide what my list view and my detail view will look like. And you can click the templates as I showed you previously, or you can do, you can do custom views. And I did decide to do custom views. And when I click on this list, once I've got it set up, again, now I'm down another level. This is my available rentals. And you can see that I can edit both my cell view and my detail view. Same thing here. I dropped an image. In this case, I wanted my image to be the same for each line item on the list. I wanted it to say NYC. So I clicked constant instead of data source. So when the user looks at the list, they're going to see NYC and then the information about the available rentals. In my detail view, when you click on it, this is what you will see. What this does is just tell you, if you've clicked full screen mode, you can't do anything else. You can't drop any buttons on like we did before and add text or images or anything else. If you don't want it to be a full screen view, if you want to be able to add additional information onto this screen, including dropping another list inside the list, you've got to double click here. And I go into my detail view. Now what I have is my third level of information. So my user saw a list of my districts. They picked the Bronx. They saw a list of the different types of properties they could pick on. They clicked lofts. They see a list of the properties that I have that are loft apartments. And when they click on that, they see this final level of information, which is all the detail about my property. I'm just going to stop for a brief minute and check questions again before we move on. Okay, so question, how can a potential customer look for a specific apartment without going through the whole list? Okay, Guy, the way that they can do that is in your data source, right here, within your different data sources that you put in here, you can determine whether or not something is searchable and or sortable. If you clicked on this information, if you clicked apartment type, For example, maybe you've got 30 different types of apartments that the user could choose from. If you click searchable, a searchable field is going to show up on the apartment type list, and the user could put in studio, and immediately studio is going to pop up, and they can then look at just the studio apartments. So that's how that functionality would work. So at this last level of detail here, this is where I used my data sources and my constant buttons. So I put an image in here. I put information about the name of the property, the price of the property. So right here, this is where I put price. I clicked for my data source and I selected that I wanted it to pull the cost information. As you can see here, the property details list, this was the one that had the most information on it for me. So all of the possible fields that could go in this text field show up. And I have to be sure I click on the right one for the information I want to display. Again, if you save your app, you look at it on your device, and you realize that what's showing up here is the number of bedrooms, you'll understand that you just need to go back in and pick the correct field. I picked my image. Again, just brought over an image button and told it that I wanted it to relate to the images in my list. And what it does is pull each image for each line item. And then down here, this is what I was talking about, where I determined if I wanted to have something show up as constant or as data source. So I want the user to be able to see that there's a line item that's bedrooms, and then how many, and that there's a line item that is bathrooms, and how many. So I would label it as such and hit constant, and it would give me the information that I needed to stay right here, bedroom. Now the other thing that I've done down here is I've actually in this list dropped some executables. So I'm in the last level of detail view here, and I want the user to be able to do a number of things. I wanted them to be able to call just by pushing this button, so I dropped the call button onto the screen. By default, this phone number will show up right here. You don't need to do anything with this. You can just leave it just like this, because the phone number is going to be pulled from your data source. My email, I also made constant. In this case, I made my email constant because I don't want it to relate to my data source. I don't want it to go out if my data source had a bunch of emails in it and pull all the different emails. In this case, I want the user to push the button, it opens up their email and automatically populates the address that I've pre-selected. And that would go right here. And here, I've actually dropped a form onto the detail view of this list. So I took the form tab, the form button, I dropped it into my detail view, and I created a form. I labeled it See Apartment. In this case, I decided that I wanted it to generate an email once the form was submitted. And again, simple housekeeping, I can decide the height and width of my icon, whether or not it has a picture or is text, and of course the time settings, which can be helpful when you're doing something like an apartment form where there is some type of important timing associated with it. It's going to be important for the person on the back end to be able to know how much time has elapsed between the time the information was submitted and the time they've received it and or gotten to it. And if I click inside my form, I created this form after I dropped my button down. I put all this information in that I wanted to collect from the user. These are all just text fields. And for a form, for those of you who've not used a form yet, my fields are right here for my form that allow me to bring over information and drop it into the form. In this case, the text/number field. All of these fields right here are text and number fields. I drop the field down, and these are basically open boxes that the user will put in the associated information. Now, in this particular case, I actually filled out a default value for the message. I didn't want the user to have to bother to fill out an entire email that said, "Hey, I'm interested in looking at this property, and it's this property. It's located at this location, so on and so forth." I wanted the user to just be able to put in their personal contact information and have the email automatically populated in the body. And so I put a message in here that by default, every time a user goes to fill out the form, it will automatically have this information in the body. They only need to fill out their contact info. Basically, I've walked through the process of how to create a relationship on the back end by utilizing data sources, either uploading spreadsheets or using a data connector, or potentially both. And then the front end piece, which is your advanced lists. And again, the ability to drop a list inside a list. What I will tell you is that it can be a little nerve wracking going through the process at first when you're using multiple data sources. But we've tried to make the platform as intuitive as possible in understanding which data sources you've married to which ones. So as you start to drop lists inside of lists, it's going to understand the lists that you have available to work with based on the relationships. So if you've got 25 lists in your data source and you've married one list to another list, it is going to know that when you've picked list A, your only option to drop a second list in is list B. It's not even going to acknowledge that the other lists exist because you haven't created relationships to tell the platform that. So hopefully that's made it a little more intuitive and user friendly for you. Again, I do know that this is a lot of information. Oh, hang on. Let me just see if there's any other questions here. If you go out to the resources tab on the Snappii website and click on user manual, there is an entire section dedicated to data sources and advanced lists that walks you through step by step the three different kinds of relationships that you could create: the one to many, and one to one. And hopefully that will assist you as well. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us at sales@snappii.com. We will do our best to help you out. And I wish you good luck and hope you have a great day. Thank you.